The Remembering Them podcast is a platform for people to share stories and memories of their loved ones who have passed away. The podcast was created in memory of Dad, Bob Cecil. May he rest in peace. Your hosts, Mark Cecil and Ryan Thwaites, acknowledge the rich history and importance of storytelling within Indigenous culture.
My name is Jorgi Skeen, and I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we meet here today. Today we're meeting in Meanjin, and those traditional owners are the Yagara and Turrbal people, and I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge my people, the Gubbi Gubbi people, and extend that acknowledgement to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people listening in today.
Hello, Luke. Welcome back to the podcast.
Morning, Mark. Thanks for having me, mate.
No Ryan today. He is, as we know, we talked about this, the three of us actually, when we caught up, that if anyone misses a recording, then the other two or one person has free reign to explain to our listeners his excuse for not being here. So as we know, Ryan is heavily into his CrossFit. He's a plant-based eater. So obviously the natural progression, the reason why he isn't here today.
I think it's funny you mentioned this because I was driving earlier this morning, came back from the gym, and I'm pretty sure I saw him in Lycra riding a bike on the highway.
It is a morning recording, so that would make sense. So I believe, as we said, the natural progression, CrossFitter, plant-based, loves his Lycra. He's obviously become a mammal. So
it's either that or he's doing burpees, which we all know, burpees don't count as cardio. So I would say he's on the bike.
He's on the bike. Middle-aged man in Lycra. Ryan is middle-aged, so that would completely make sense. So ride safe, Ryan. Hopefully we see you safely back into the seat very shortly. Enjoy your ride.
Mate. That's right, mate. Enjoy that Lycra.
Onto the clues. Can't wait till he hears this one back. So we do agree that the beauty of this is that the person won't actually know what we've said about them until they listen back to the episode. So,
you're welcome, Ryan.
But we have a guest today. Clues for you as a guest. So clue number one. Actually, I was hoping Ryan was here because the fourth clue. I've got 4 clues, and the fourth clue is specifically for him. But let's see. You might be able to get it.
Oh, is that a Lycra related question?
Yes, it is a Lycra.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. He's good in that space.
Clue number one. This city has the oldest and one of the largest Chinatowns outside of Asia, full of shops, restaurants, and cultural sites.
Chinatown, hey?
Yeah, we're after a city.
I want to say close to China, obviously. Let's go with Sydney.
Not Sydney. I believe Sydney does have a large Chinatown, but it's not one of the largest.
I was just there. It's just there for Chinese New Year.
You were. So not Sydney. Clue number 2 for you. Play along at home as always. There is a street in this city that is known as the crookedest street in the world. This winding flower-lined street is a popular photo spot for Instagrammers, I'm assuming.
Are we in the States? I'm just trying to think what's close to China where they would have immigrated to. Because back in the day, I think this is crazy because obviously you didn't have, when you immigrated in the early 1900s, you didn't have planes. So you just caught a boat for what, 3 a month? That's insane.
Yeah.
Okay. New York.
Not
City.
New York. Third clue for you. This city is famous for its cool, foggy weather, especially in summer months when the fog rolls in from the Pacific Ocean.
From the Pacific Ocean. San Fran.
We are in San Fran. Well done. The fourth clue that would have been for Ryan. It's not a cycling one. It's a baseball one. So
Oh, yeah.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say the city's MLB team home stadium is known for its stunning waterfront views. So
There you
I'm
go.
guessing you
Yeah.
would have got that. The crookedest street in the world is Lombard Street. That was clue number two. And the Giants, San Francisco Giants, of course, their stadium has waterfront views. No cycling clues for Ryan, and he couldn't be here anyway. So San Francisco is a
Unfortunate.
dynamic city famous for its iconic landmarks, diverse culture, and blend of history and innovation. Our guest today is a professional cuddler. She lives with her boyfriend. She does acrobatics in her free time. Many don't know that she's a dance show producer. So our guest from San Francisco, California is Felicity Azura. Welcome to the Remembering Them podcast officially, Felicity. Thank you very much for joining us all the way from San Francisco in the States. Good afternoon, your
Mhm.
time.
Good afternoon, Mark. Thank you so much for having me.
Appreciate you jumping on. If you'd like to jump in by telling us who we're talking about today and a little bit about them and when and how they passed.
Well, as of recording, it is the same month that my paternal grandmother passed. And she was, I believe, in her 90s when she passed away. She is a Vietnam War survivor. She and everyone else on my dad's side, they are immigrants to the United States. And immigrants from their generation, they they have their real birthday and then they have their documentation birthday, meaning I can only imagine in the 70s how few Vietnamese and Cantonese translators there were in the United States, especially in the Midwest where they moved to. And so I'm sure things got lost in translation. Some people ended up being older on their US IDs than they actually are. But on her death certificate, it says that she passed away at 85. And she passed away when I was in Fiji. So my mom and my dad took me to Fiji on New Year's Eve of last year. We were there for about 10 days and we did talk. There was this very brief conversation of what are we going to do if grandma passes whilst we are in another country? Are we just going to cancel everything and then immediately fly back, or are we just going to commit to our original schedule? And we decided to commit to the original schedule. And so for at least a year prior to my grandma passing, she lived in this nursing home. And the nursing home is good in some ways because a lot of the nurses who work there speak Cantonese. And she is a Chinese woman who spent a lot of my dad's childhood in Vietnam. So she survived the French occupation, she survived the Japanese occupation. She did not learn French, she did not learn Japanese. She spoke Cantonese, which blows a lot of people's minds. But that's how my paternal grandma and grandpa were. And so uh, they moved from Vietnam to Minnesota of the United States, which is a very, very rural, mostly white part of the United States. It still is. And what my aunts and uncles have told me is that the small town Americans were extremely nice to them. Believe it or not, even though there was so much propaganda being shoved in America's faces, they found Americans to be very, very friendly. And then my dad's family moved when they were still kids. My dad and his siblings were all still kids when they moved from Minnesota to California. And when my dad moved to California and then got a bunch of minimum wage jobs, he somehow crossed paths with my mom, because my mom is also an immigrant, also of Chinese descent, but she's never lived in Vietnam. My mom spent a lot of her formative years in Hong Kong. So she also speaks Cantonese, and so my parents can bond over that. And then my parents had me, and for my grandparents on both sides, they don't really talk about life before I was born. My paternal grandma, paternal grandpa, maternal grandma, paternal, they all don't really talk about their lives, even their lives when my mom and dad were children, which breaks my heart, because I would love to know what my grandparents' lives were like when my mom was a kid and when they were kids. And in addition, there's not that many photographs of my grandparents prior to my parents getting married. I mean, I know what they look like when they were young. I just look in a mirror because I do have their features. But even if I never got to hear those stories directly from them, it would have been nice to have some photographs or videos even, or audio. But they didn't have those luxuries. They didn't grow up with the privileges that I have right now. Both on both sides of my family, my grandmothers, they were doing a bunch of unpaid labor. Just my mom's mom was busy raising two kids, all whilst working 12-hour shifts at a factory 6 days a week. And then on my dad's side, my grandma had my dad when she was really young, like I don't know. Okay, maybe not 20, more like 30, which to me it's still very young. 30-year-olds are not old. But you know, grandma on my dad's side raised 6 children. And that was all on one income. My grandfather, who was a carpenter, that just blows my mind, because I definitely could not do that. But yeah, my dad has many younger siblings. He's the oldest in his family. And it sucks because one of my uncles on my dad's side passed away when I was around 1. So I don't have any personal memories with that uncle. But, you know, East Asian people, or at least within my family, there's a lot of taboo around death and talking about deceased relatives. People are just, to me, it seems like they just pretend that a person like never existed. After they die, they just don't talk about that relative anymore. And so growing up, my grandma never really talked to me about my deceased Uncle Fung. And, you know, when my grandma passed a couple of weeks ago, I asked my family, so are you just gonna like tell me the birthday of Uncle Fung? And they said, frankly, we don't really remember his birthday. But I can't really fault them for that, because he passed away, you know, over 20 years ago. And when you're an immigrant in America, you got your real birthday and then you got your, you know, documentation birthday. And so that confuses everything.
Felicity, was she sick when you went overseas, when you went over to Fiji?
Oh, yes. Before she was in a nursing home, my grandfather would take care of her all day. And then he passed from kidney failure. And so my parents hired a caretaker to just live with grandma for about 5 days a week. And it's really hard to be the sole caretaker of someone, or the caretaker of someone 5 out of 7 days a week. It was just too much on the caregiver. And so my parents made the very tough decision to put her in a nursing home. And by some miracle, we found one where it was not only close by, but the nurses can speak Cantonese. And something I've observed in a lot of older folks whose first language is not English is that even if they do learn English as a third language, when their body and brains deteriorate, they tend to revert to their first language. And sometimes parents and grandparents don't teach their descendants their first language. They teach their descendants English because it's the most globalized language in the world, right? And that's scary because, well, English is my first language, but I would hate to have children and then grandchildren, and then by the time I'm 90, I can only speak in a language that none of them are fluent in. And thankfully, my dad, he married a Cantonese woman, and so he never lost Cantonese. With all due respect to my dad, his reading skills are not as great as my mom's. She can read Chinese characters with no sweat. I took Chinese in middle school, high school, and college, yet I still struggle with reading Chinese characters. It's not an easy language to read in. And when my grandma lost her mobility in her legs, she could still write though. And so when I would visit her in the nursing center, if I brought her a piece of paper and a pen, she would just write like, "How are you?" and I would speak back at her. And so even though she was not able to use her legs for many years before she died, I am very grateful that she could still communicate through writing.
Lucy,
And
what did you call her? What did you refer to her as?
oh,
And that was one question. Another question
that's
is
a good
what
question.
was her actual name? And
Oh,
then third question for you around that is how would you describe her? How do you remember her?
my grandma's name was Ben, and it's spelled D-E-N-H, but you know, even though her name was Ben, she is not Vietnamese by blood. Just like how I have a very Anglican name, but I don't have European ancestry to my knowledge. And so her maiden family name was Wong, but when she married my grandpa, I think she still kept Wong, but it was when they moved to the United States, they're like, oh yeah, in the US, it's pretty common for wives to take their husband's family name. So everyone just called her like Mrs., insert grandpa's last name. And I don't know what's the Vietnamese word for grandma. I called her mama, which is Cantonese for maternal. No, not maternal, paternal grandma. Now, I have cousins who called her Popo because those cousins, that's their mom's mom. Whereas for me, grandma was my dad's mom. So I called her one thing, and then some of my cousins called her something else because Cantonese is a very gendered language. And it's also your relatives are addressed by whether they're on your mom's side or on your dad's side.
Yeah,
And it's all
I
very serious.
actually, sorry, Felicity. I actually I
Yeah, that's
had
fine.
celebrated Chinese New Year with my partner who's Chinese, and yeah, that's something I
Hmm.
learnt. Like the uncles from your mum's side are different to uncles on your dad's side. So you're right. It's very like gender specific and orientated.
And
So
then the
it's interesting.
spouses, you call them something else.
Mm,
My older
yep.
sister, she has a husband, and I have to call him like Jeffu, which is weird to me because we're like the same age, and we just call each other by our first names. Um, and so my grandmothers are very different in personalities. but what they have in common is that they loved me unconditionally. And I am so grateful for the time I got to spend with her because so many other people, their grandmothers passed away when they were children. She got to see me grow up to be an adult. And in fact, all of my deceased grandparents were able to at least see me graduate high school, which my younger sibling can't say the same for my younger sibling. But I never noticed any favoritism. Like she didn't have a favorite grandchild. And you would think that this like old school Chinese woman would favor boys over girls and be upset that she had more granddaughters than grandsons. But I never noticed that in her. And you know, if I were to be a grandma, I I have very good role models to harken back on.
What are some of those lessons that you have learned from her?
Ooh. Grandma and grandpa set very good examples for what a healthy long-term relationship looks like. So I don't really want to comment on my parents' marriage, but my grandparents always seemed happily married to me. And, sometimes when I get frustrated with my significant other, I think about what my grandma would want, and she would want me to be virtuous and forgiving, and I think she never sat me down and said, "These are the things you're supposed to do for your husband." But by observing her and grandpa, I I was exposed to what a healthy romantic relationship can look like.
I'm
It made
getting
sense.
comedic vibes as well. Was she kind of cheeky and funny in a way?
Um, I do have I do have one memory where she was teaching me Cantonese, and so there's this pastry that has this pineapple filling inside. Um, Cantonese people love pastries. Bao is delicious. But I do remember one time, um, before she lost her ability to speak, she held up a pineapple bun and she said, 呢個係菠蘿包, and I did not hear the last part. So I thought she said, "This is a pineapple," which it clearly wasn't. No, I was just flabbergasted. And my dad had to correct me, like, "No, you gotta pay more attention to grandma. She's clearly saying this is bolo bao, which is pineapple bun."
So this is during your teachings of her trying to pass on the language, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's cute. I like that story. It's a good story.
Do you have another favorite story or memory of her, Felicity?
Oh, this involves grandma and my older sister. So at some point in our childhood, my older sister, I think for a school project, had to write down a recipe from a relative. And my older sister decided on my grandmother's abalone recipe. And so we still have it. We still have the piece of paper. And I haven't tried it yet, but now that I am in my late 20s, I really do understand what people mean when they say that our ancestors live on through recipes. And it's just, I don't think any of my siblings have attempted that recipe, but you know, I I should probably try it this year and then get so good at it over time that it'll probably be the recipe that I put on my headstone, because I didn't know this until I was 25, but some people put recipes on their gravestone, which sounds weird at first, but then you realize that people live on through their recipes, and you're like, I get it.
I think I'd probably just put rice on my gravestone. I'm not
I
very
love
good at
rice.
that. Just
Rice is
plain
so
rice.
good.
You got like the knuckle to measure the water, right?
Oh yes, I do the
That's
knuckle
probably all, yeah,
testing.
that's probably all I do. I'm pretty simple like that.
So
The Remembering Them podcast is supported by My Legacy Message. How do you want to be remembered? My Legacy Message provides a service that delivers a keepsake video to your loved ones, often as a surprise, after you pass. My Legacy Message. Be remembered.
So, Felicity, is that something that you think you will, one attempt to cook and create, make it that'll is your way for her to live on, I guess. Is that something do you think that you will take on, whether it be that recipe or something else? Cooking, do you think that'll be something that you remember her by or try to?
Oh yes. I am sad that I will never eat a home cooked meal from her again, but I am grateful that I have learned so many recipes within the past 5 years. And growing up, my parents, they taught me how to cut vegetables. They never taught me other stuff like how to use an oven. And so I learned all those things as an adult. But I'm impressed by how much I learned within the past 5 years, and I've been able to cook food for my mom's mom, who is my last remaining grandparent. And whilst I am sad, I've never been able to cook for my now deceased grandparents. I can at least show my gratitude towards my last remaining grandma.
That makes sense. Would you say that you treat her differently, or are you more, I guess, purposeful with your relationship with her following the passing of your paternal grandmother?
Oh, yes. So the first grandparent of mine to die was my mom's dad. And I didn't really I mean, there's some photos of him and I together, but after he passed, I knew deep in my heart that I want to take photos with my grandparents more frequently. And so, um, I should probably take videos and audio as well of my remaining grandma. And when my paternal grandma passed weeks ago, my sister and her husband decided to record audio of my uncles and my aunts reflecting and sharing childhood memories with grandma. And I have asked them recently if they've transcribed them. They have not transcribed the 2 hour long raw audio files, which I can't really blame them for. But that was a very, very good move on their part, and I want to do something similar for my mom's mom.
It's a great idea. It's something that we, highly recommend to all of our guests or anyone that we talk to. In fact, following our experiences with this podcast, really important to whether it's audio or video or even pictures. Take those while you can before it's too late. Goes without saying. Lessons that you've learned along the way from your grandma or even post her passing, lessons for other people. I mean, we talked about the lessons you've learned from her around, cooking and how to treat your significant other, which is a really great lesson, I think, from role modeling. But lessons for other people that are listening to this that have elderly grandparents that may be in nursing homes or whatever the case may be. What advice would you give to people listening to this?
People who live in nursing homes receive a lot of clinical touch, but they don't receive much nurturing touch. And so when my older sister and I would visit her in the nursing center, we would hold her hand, not to like check her pulse or anything, um, just just hold her hand, because I would argue that people in nursing homes are some of the loneliest people on the planet, even though they are constantly surrounded by other people. It's just they don't get much nurturing touch. And so I hope listeners with relatives in assisted living facilities remember to just hold their hand, because you never know when will be your last opportunity to just hold someone's hand. And as a professional cuddler, I do help a lot of people feel, wanted, and I nurture them. But the fact of the matter is, I I'm not visiting people in nursing homes and just holding their hand. I mean, what if somebody has deceased children or grandchildren, so no one to visit them to hold their hand? Like, as a professional cuddler, I think of these things, and I never got to tell grandma that was my occupation before she passed, but I think if I did, she would just be grateful that I have a job. She's just, I think she'd be grateful that I have a way to just put food on the table.
It's a really good piece of advice. Is it something that you or your sister, or is it a um, metric of your occupation, or how did you come to that conclusion? That's something that's really important that your grandmother might need, or people in nursing homes in general might need.
So on my podcast, where I mainly interview other professional cuddlers, I once interviewed this wonderful woman named Grace, and she, in addition to being a professional cuddler, is a death doula. Apparently, there are doulas for many different things. I didn't know that before meeting Grace, but she not only nurtures people through touch, but she helps people with the grieving process, which is just such a beautiful vocation. And she mentioned that when I interviewed her for my podcast, that people in hospitals and whatnot receive clinical touch, but not really nurturing touch. And they need that, because we all do.
Yeah, it's great. It's a really great piece of advice. One that'll stick with me actually, that we haven't heard before on this podcast. So it's wonderful that you were able to get that from a guest on your podcast.
Mhm.
Last question for you for the official part of the podcast. Sometimes people find it quite difficult, so a little bit of a warning there. And I'm not going to hold you to translation at all, so feel free to say it in English. But if your grandmother was in front of you today, granted it was only a couple of weeks ago that she's passed, so
Mhm.
quite recent, what would you say to her today?
Mm. Which means thank you, Grandma, I love you, in Cantonese.
Perfect. Thank you for the translation. I would have walked away wondering, I wonder what you would have said. So
Mhm.
appreciate it. And appreciate you coming on to the podcast. Thank you very much for sharing stories and memories and really great pieces of advice, I think, there at the end, for people listening to this. And thank you for giving up your time and talking about your grandmother.
Thank you so much, Mark.
So Luke, that was Felicity from San Francisco in California.
Thanks, Felicity. That was great. And if she's listening, it'll be a bit late when it comes out, but Gong Hai Fa Chao, which is it's the equivalent of Happy Chinese New Year, Happy New Lunar New Year, shall we say? But if anyone, I'll definitely give her a plug if I know of any mates looking for a professional cuddle in San Fran.
Over in San Francisco, yeah.
Reach out to Felicity. She's got the goods.
Yes, we talked about that in the Patreon and while we're talking about that, our Patreon members jump on $6 a month US, I believe. You can hear that exclusive chat, not only with Felicity, but all of our previous main guests and also Chat TAP guests since we've started that, but there's about 10 or so, I think, on there. So we talked about her profession. I thought it was a throwaway, but it is actually her profession. We talked about her podcast as well, which the name of the podcast, Luke?
Pro Cuddle Hustle.
Pro Cuddle Hustle. So there
Correct
you
me if
go.
I'm wrong.
No, that is correct. I was just
Give that a
hoping you
plug.
remember.
Search that up. If you're a cuddle enthusiast, just give it a quick look.
Yeah, she said she talks to
I encourage
other
it.
therapists and the ins and outs of the profession. So that was a really cool chat. So jump onto our Patreon to listen to that exclusive with Felicity. As always, like and follow all of our socials. Like and review the podcast, rate and review, I should say, the podcast. That'd be really appreciated. 5 stars if you see it fit. Share this podcast as well, this episode, with any of your friends or family that you think would resonate. Felicity had some really, really awesome pieces of advice, I think, towards the end of the podcast there for people that might have relatives in nursing facilities. So that was,
It's a
I
great
think,
insight.
yeah, it was wise beyond her years, I would say, respectfully, as a 20-year-old or in her late 20s. That was a really good piece of advice, and I hadn't heard before. So, one that she'd picked up from someone else on her podcast. So that was really cool. And
I liked how Felicity also mentioned that she wants to record her last remaining grandparent, which
yeah,
also flows on.
flows on really nicely. Great segue into the My Legacy Message service that we, of course, provide. Record a video for your family members or friends before you pass and deliver to them as a keepsake video that they can have forever. And as Felicity mentioned in her chat with us, that she would have loved to have more of that stuff from not only her most recent paternal grandmother, but also her other grandparents that have already passed as well. So that was really cool to hear that they were being proactive with that. But of course, that service is out there, something that we is a support of our podcast and something we truly believe in. Great chat with Felicity. Luke, thank you for jumping on without Ryan here to join us off cycling the streets of Brisbane.
I was going to say he'll be tuning in next week to listen to this while he dons on his lycra. That's
he
fine,
will,
mate.
I'm sure.
At least he knows who to go for if he needs a cuddle.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
thanks, Mark. Thanks, Felicity. It was great chat.
Really great chat. Looking forward to the next one. Till then, everyone take care. Thank you, Luke. Love you, mate.
Thank you, Mark.
Bye.
The Remembering Them podcast is created for entertainment purposes. Mark and Ryan are not licensed mental health professionals. If you would like to discuss your mental well-being, several free resources are available in Australia. Information about these services is available in the podcast notes. Please take the time to contact a loved one today and tell them how much you appreciate and love them.